I hit the internet and I started to research what are the easiest ways to keep yourself in a good mood. How do you, because I didn't want to rely on what nurse was going to come through the door next and what they might say. I didn't want to rely on other people to make me feel good so that I could do the physiotherapy that I needed to do and do everything that I needed to do to, to get better and learn how to walk again. So everything I found on the internet pointed to something called gratitude journaling. Has anybody heard of gratitude journal before? A few people? Not too many. Well, that's good. We're going to introduce you to something really important today. So gratitude journal, what they ask you to do, there's a few ways you can do it, is you write down 1 or 2 or 3 things every single day that you're grateful for. And it doesn't need to be big crazy things, it can be little things. So when I was in the hospital, hospital food isn't very good, right? But it was food, I had food. Or I had salt and pepper to put on my meat, little things. And if anybody's been in the hospital before, you know the bed sheets aren't always very good. But the nurses knew I didn't like the bed sheets, and they kind of sanded away at my feet and my butt. But they came in and they changed them for me like every single day because they knew that was important to me. So little tiny things that might not matter, we might take for granted on other days, I started to take notice of them, everything I could, as often as I could. And that made me feel so good, because when everything felt like it was being taken away from me, I started to realize how much I still had. Has anybody ever felt like things were getting taken away from them, or things were out of control a little bit? Or you had an accident and it was not your fault at all, but because of it, things in your life change. And you didn't do anything to deserve it, but it was happening. And what happens is we get focused in on that. And when we get focused on that, we start to forget the other things that we have. And it literally changes the chemicals in our brain when we get focused differently. So I found this thing called the gratitude journal. So I did the gratitude journaling for like 2 years, and it helped. 6 weeks later, the other trick is, Wyatt, my son here, he's 5.5. So Wyatt was 2.5 at the time, and my daughter Olivia, who is 3.5, she wasn't born yet, but she was due to be born in 6 weeks from when I went into the hospital. So not only did I lose my job, and I lost my ability to play sports, I lost the ability to walk, and my wife was pregnant, like 8 weeks away from having a baby, and I didn't even know when we went into the hospital if I was going to be able to come out of the hospital in time for the baby. I didn't know, I couldn't feel my hands very well. I didn't know if I would be able to hold on to the baby. I didn't know if I'd be able to help around the house with the baby. But 6 weeks later, I walked out of the hospital. And the doctors and the nurses all thought it was a miracle, essentially. And I contribute so much of it to my attitude. And because I had such a good attitude, because I remembered all the things that I was grateful for, so the physiotherapists, they're only supposed to do an hour of therapy with you each day. But because I was such a fun patient to work with and I stayed in a good mood, they would come back in the afternoon and spend another hour. Or they'd stay late for an hour after their shift and do more work with me, because I wanted to get out of that hospital so bad, and I wanted to relearn how to walk so bad that it started to attract, people wanted to do more to help me to accomplish my goals. So after that, we moved back, the baby was born, we moved back to Waterloo, because does everybody know about the American healthcare system? What's different than than the Canadian healthcare system? You have to pay for it. So the bill was about $750,000. But we got really great news from our insurance company one day. Our baby was free. So we actually got a note from the insurance company that said, "Great news! You've spent all the money that any family can spend in a single year on healthcare, so the baby is free." Hooray! Canada, we give away free babies every day. So we moved back to Canada because healthcare was better and less expensive, and our family was here. We realized so much how important it is to have family to support you and to be around when you need help. So we moved, and we decided to move to Kitchener-Waterloo, and I couldn't go back to work, so I decided to go back to school. And what I wanted to learn everything I could learn about how our mood and how our psychology and our mental health, how that improves or affects our ability to perform, no matter how it is. So for me, performance had gone from professional lacrosse to walking. I viewed learning how to walk as my performance, as my ability to perform, the same way as I used to view playing a 60-minute lacrosse game. So I went back to school and I was taking some online courses, and this is a picture of me sitting in my office. So the gratitude journaling takes a little bit of time. It takes 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, to really put some thought into why you're grateful about something. So one day I was doing an online neuropsychology exam. Sound like fun? Online neuropsychology. And when you do an online exam, they give you twice as many questions because they know that you've got the internet right there to find all the answers if you need them. So I was sitting there and I have relapses where I lose the ability to walk. Sometimes I end up on a cane again. Very rarely, but even last week I had to spend about a day and a half in bed, kind of resting. It looks like Parkinson's disease. And so this was happening at the same time. So I was on my cane and I was kind of stuck in the house. I was writing a neuropsychology exam, so things weren't awesome again. It was January in Waterloo and snow was this deep instead of being in San Jose where there was never snow ever. So I noticed that I had lots of reasons all of a sudden to be depressed or to be upset, or I could easily notice what I didn't have or what wasn't great. And then all of a sudden I heard the kids down the hallway. And do any of you have little brothers or sisters? Or do you babysit maybe? Little kids in the bathtub are awesome. So they're in there and they're playing and splashing and farting and giggling, and I could hear that. And when I was in the hospital, one of the worst things about the hospital is that at 8 o'clock at night, visiting hours are over, they start to turn the lights down, and it gets incredibly lonely and incredibly quiet. You have tons of time to just lay there and think. And if you don't have good things to think about, you end up thinking about bad things. Well, at this point, I had plenty going wrong. I really didn't want to write this neuropsychology exam, but I could hear the kids down the hall, which the last time when I was like that before, there was no kids to hear at 8 o'clock at night before bedtime, and it made me smile. So instead, I didn't have time to stop and write this gratitude journal. So I did have Facebook. Everybody's got Facebook, right? And people, I had started to share my gratitude a little bit over Facebook and on social media, and I was writing a blog. But on this day, I decided to do this instead. I typed that up on a piece of paper real quick, printed it out, because I could do it in like 30 seconds, and I held it up in front of my face, and I took a picture with my webcam, and I put it online. And that was the day the Smile Epidemic was born. So for some reason, the Smile Epidemic online has turned into this really safe place where you can really share what makes you happy, because we don't celebrate things when they're negative. We only celebrate things that are positive. So we used to think, and there's some truth to this, that if we work really, really hard, then we'll be successful, we'll get a good job, and that when we get a good job and we're successful, then we'll be happy, right? So we should take all of our energy and we should put it in to working hard towards things and getting success, and that's partly true. But what we've learned in the last 10 years, and really learned a lot about in the last 2 years, is that it can also work the other way around. So that if you actually take people and you help them to be happy first, then if they're happy and they work just as hard, they get twice as much or 3 times as much success, depending on what they're doing. And then it cycles them into being even happier, so that we can actually focus more on things like mental health and wellness, things like the month of May, working on being happier, learning how to be happier ourselves, and then things go better for us when we're in that place. So it's worth spending some time and money. Has anybody ever used Google before? How many of you would say that Google's a pretty successful company? Yeah, maybe a little bit? Okay, let's do, how much money do you think they spend on happiness? None. Wrong. Anybody else? Any guesses? How much money does Google spend on happiness? $1 million a year. A little bit more than that. Anybody else? Yeah? 2 million? 75 times that much. Google spends $150 million a year on the happiness of its employees. That's awesome. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. So Google is famous. How many of you would like to maybe work for Google one day now that you know that, right? So Google has free lunch. Google has free breakfast. If you have a baby, Google gives you free daycare. You bring your baby to work, and they have a daycare right on site that takes care of your baby. And then, when you first come back to work and you want to go visit your baby, you can, because they're right there. They have free parking everywhere. They have free buses that pick people up at work and get them to work so that they don't have to deal with the stress of driving in traffic. They've taken an entirely different approach to everything that they do because they know that if their employees show up happy, that they work harder and they're more creative